So let me introduce our next presenter, John Sykes. John is working on avalanche terrain modeling, analyzing GPS data and mechanized ski guides to develop decision-making tools for the SFU program. His master's was at Montana State University in their snow avalanche lab. John's gonna walk us through some exciting new developments. So John, it looks like you're all set up and ready to go. Can we get a sound check, John?
Can you hear me?
Your sound is good now, and if you queue up your presentation, you're ready to go.
We're just seeing your speaker notes page, John.
Okay, let's see. Are you seeing my presentation now? For some reason, the audience view screen isn't working for me.
It's still showing the speaker notes page. If you just go below the show button, there's a little toggle arrow that'll allow you to pick that presentation main page.
Yeah, for some reason I am. Is that still the same thing?
Yeah,
same thing.
Let me see, doing the opposite. How about now?
We still have the same notes page there, John. Sorry.
No worries. I'm gonna try and figure out how to change it. Okay. Just a window. How about? Well, no, it's not gonna work.
Currently, John, we don't have any presentation displayed, so you'll have to go back to the show button.
Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Okay, no problem. Don't stress, folks. Folks recognize that this takes time, so take your time and do it right. We got lots of time. There you go. Good work.
You guys are good. You can see my presentation now.
Yeah, you're
Sure
good to go, John.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for the patience. Let me just get my notes up. Okay. Thanks for the intro, Joe. Yeah, my name is John Sykes. I'm a PhD student in Pascal's SFU Avalanche Research Program. And I'm going to share some of the research that I'm planning to do for my PhD proposal. And the title of my presentation is Assessing Avalanche Terrain Exposure Using Avalanche Hazard Indication Maps and GPS Tracks. And as you can tell from this title, I'm going to be using some of the GPS track data that Pascal has been collaborating with a bunch of guiding operations since 2014, 2015 to do this analysis. And so far, that collaboration has produced more than 70,000 GPS tracks from 8 different operations across the province. So yeah, I'm excited to share some of this with you guys. So the SFU research program has focused on different aspects of the operational decision-making process. And there's been several researchers before me that have done a bunch of this work. So I'm going to provide a little bit of background of the research that's already been done before I go into the research that I'm proposing. So this diagram kind of shows a general outline of the decision-making process for operational guides. And the research that's been done previously has been broken down by focusing on the run list and run choice sections, and then some other research focusing more on the GPS tracks themselves, which looks at ski line choice. So if you've attended these CAA spring conferences in the last few years, you've probably seen presentations focusing on how to recognize patterns in the way guides generate the run list and how they open and close different ski runs. And there's also been research on the hazard conditions that kind of dictate which runs are chosen by guides. So both of those focus on that higher level of decision making. In addition to that, some recent research by another colleague from SFU Avalanche Research Program has looked at collecting guides' perceptions of the ski runs that they're working on to get the more subjective perspective of the terrain. So all of that research kind of sets the stage for mine to focus on the actual GPS tracks themselves. So both of those, or those three projects I just described, looked at the bigger picture, run list and run choice. And my research is going to focus on ski line choice. Our research group also has some previous work on that scale, and mostly done by Scott Thumlark and Ira Sharp. So Scott looked at evaluating terrain severity from the GPS track data by doing some analysis of the way guides select terrain based on different avalanche danger levels. Similarly, Ira Sharp looked at patterns in the exposure of guides to different levels of avalanche terrain using a probable release area model, and he presented that research at the 2018 ISSW. So both of those are precursors to what I'm going to present today, and they take slightly different approaches to looking at avalanche terrain. So Scott's approach used individual terrain metrics such as slope angle, forest density, and curvature to kind of characterize the terrain the guides were looking at. And Ira's research kind of took that one step further by using an algorithm that can combine those kind of individual metrics and produce a probable release area model, which essentially shows areas where avalanches are likely to release and the probability within those areas of releasing an avalanche. So the first part of my research that I'm going to share looks at taking IRIC's research even one step further and including a release area model as well as a run out model in a way to characterize avalanche terrain. So my research is going to focus, at least to start, on the CMH Galena tenure. So you can see in this map, the tenure is got a bunch of GPS tracks distributed across it, and they're shown based on the avalanche danger rating at the time that they were collected. We have roughly 10,500 GPS tracks from this operation, which are going to help characterize how they change avalanche exposure based on the conditions. So what is automated avalanche hazard indication mapping? So an avalanche hazard indication map is a large-scale spatial representation of avalanche hazard based on locally available data sources. The methods used vary by country due to differences in data availability, but common approaches include mapping historic avalanche observation data and GIS modeling. And the pictures on this slide kind of illustrate observations or expert interpretation of avalanche observations on the right-hand side. And then the more colorful images are kind of illustrations of some of these GIS modeling methods and dynamic avalanche simulation, which a lot of people are probably familiar with the RAMS model or the RAMS software, and that's an example of the avalanche simulation. So recently, one of my supervisors, Dr. Yves Buehler at the SLF, has developed a method for combining avalanche release area models with dynamic avalanche simulation to create automated avalanche hazard indication maps across large mountainous areas with no previous data. In order to produce these, you need a high resolution digital elevation model, you need data on forest cover, and you need a estimate of avalanche release depth for that area. So I'm going to run through how we're going to adapt this method, the automated avalanche hazard indication mapping, for the study area at CMH Galena. Here's an example of a Swiss trip planning tool that was produced for the entire Swiss Alps using a variation of the automated hazard indication mapping algorithm. The red areas are potential release areas with darker colors indicating higher probability of avalanche release. And the yellow areas show the run out for up to size 3 avalanche. The blue zones show potential for remote trigger locations. Compared to common trip planning maps such as slope angles or satellite imagery, these maps capture the physical processes specific to avalanche release and run out and provide a more accurate trip planning resource. One kind of limitation of the current mapping algorithm, which you can see circled by this yellow box, is that they don't capture probable release areas in forested terrain. So for my study area, a large portion of the terrain is at tree line or below. So the inclusion of release areas in forested terrain is really important to accurately capturing the decision-making of guides through their GPS tracks. So the goal of my research is going to be to extend or apply this method to Canadian mountains and also extend it to include these forested release areas. So the way that I'm going to do that, my overall goal is to minimize the cost and time for producing these maps so that this method could be applied elsewhere in Canada. The CMH Galena tenure is kind of a test site for implementing these methods. And you can see we're going to create this high resolution DEM. So that's kind of the biggest hurdle as far as cost to creating these maps. The Canadian DEM that's publicly available across the whole country is approximately 20-meter resolution. And this algorithm requires closer to 5-meter resolution to be produced. So in order to create that, we've purchased some satellite imagery, which is a Spot 6 satellite imagery. The picture on the upper right shows the kind of orientation of the satellites when that data was collected for CMH Galena. And we can use that to generate the DEM, and we can also use that to generate a land cover classification that'll tell us about the spatial extent of forest cover. So the lower right image on this slide shows the input data sets from the satellite imagery that you can use to generate this land cover classification, which basically shows you, is it a forested area? Is it covered in shrubs or bare rock or snow? It kind of just gives you this basic classification of what the ground surface cover is. As an example of the DEM processing, this is a shot from CMH Galena of the Canadian DEM, the publicly available 20-meter resolution DEM, and compared to the 5-meter DEM that I was able to produce with this Spot 6 imagery. So you can see it captures a lot of small scale terrain features much more accurately. And there's a
sorry to interrupt, John.
Yeah.
We're getting a blank screen here on your presentation. It's just a white screen currently.
Okay, is it
loading? Now I have a topo map.
What can you see now?
Right now I just have a hillside shading topo map with nothing on top.
Okay, is it still just giving you a blank white screen?
No, it is just like I say, it's a black and white topo map with some hillside shading on it. There we go. Now I think it might be a very large image and it's just loading. There we go. Now we have the processing pipeline. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. I think it's getting really laggy. I just jumped back and forth a couple slides, so I think maybe it's lagging.
Yeah, I think we're just eating up the bandwidth there.
Maybe I'll just describe this and move on to the next slide that doesn't have a huge image on it. Let me know, can you now see the forested avalanche release area slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So anyways, that slide just illustrates the capability of a higher resolution DEM to model smaller release areas, potential release areas, and capture the terrain more accurately. And that's the biggest hurdle for applying the automated hazard indication mapping algorithm in Canada, is producing that higher resolution DEM data. So that's one of the big hurdles, is we need the DEM, the forest cover, and the release areas. The release areas I forgot to cover, but those we're going to generate from CMH Galena observations, which go back several decades and give us an accurate representation of average release depth for certain size avalanches. Those are necessary for doing the RAMS simulations. In addition to that, we're going to characterize these forested avalanche release areas that I discussed earlier. So the key for us to do that is to capture guide observations from their tenure. So we've created an online platform that guides can log into and basically just go through and circle areas that they've observed avalanches and give us some characteristics about the depth, the width of the avalanche, and a little bit of background about what the conditions were that produced it. And that'll allow us to extract forest characteristics for each of those release areas to develop a new parameter for this probable release area algorithm that will include forested terrain. This is another maybe image that might struggle to load, so let me know if it doesn't show up. But hopefully it showed up, and this is a kind of general illustration of how this whole process is going to fit together. So in the red box is all the processing that I just talked about with the satellite imagery. So to boil it all down, we need a bunch of satellite imagery to create a high resolution DEM and this forest cover data. And then the blue box shows basically these guide observations that we're going to collect, and then the information on avalanche release depth from the CMH Galena records. All of those will be used to create a probable release area model, which essentially just highlights the areas where avalanches are going to be simulated releasing. And that will be fed into the dynamic avalanche simulation, which will then give us an accurate representation of the runout. So that's the terrain modeling side of my research. And this image is an example of what that would look like. This is just a probable release area for one of our collaborating operations. Here you can see some GPS tracks overlaying that release area, and they generally line up with the patterns of the release area, which in my mind shows kind of a rough validation that these are accurately capturing the terrain, that they line up with how the guides are using the terrain. So once we have that new way to characterize the terrain, we're going to extract it to the GPS tracks so that we can use metrics like what's the total distance of exposure to release areas and runout zones for each GPS track. That will give us a way to quantify the avalanche exposure for each track. In addition to the terrain data, we've collected these other data sets from our collaborating operations. The boxes highlighted in red are relevant to the current avalanche conditions when the GPS track was collected. And the boxes in blue are relevant to kind of the terrain use, operational terrain use at that time. So the terrain boxes will help us constrain what the terrain was that was available for that operation for that day, how often that terrain is used relative to other runs in the tenure overall, and the guide's subjective perception of the terrain, which I discussed earlier, we collected via survey research. So that'll kind of provide a more holistic perspective on the GPS tracks than we would have available if we just use physical terrain characteristics. So finally, to analyze the conditions that drive how guides change their exposure to avalanche terrain, we'll use a bunch of statistical models that if you've seen presentations previously from the SARP research group, you might be familiar with, kind of fancy regression models and these classification and decision trees that can be used to split out what variables are important for guides to determine how much exposure they're going to have to avalanche terrain. So in summary, hazard indication maps provide a new meaningful method for characterizing the terrain that looks more at the natural processes of avalanche release and runout compared to previously used methods. And we can use that representation of the terrain to link terrain exposure to avalanche conditions for a guiding operation. These could provide a foundation for future development of future slope scale decision-making models by looking at how guides alter their terrain exposure under specific conditions. And one key element of this research is having a strong collaboration with guiding operations to be able to collect this data and also validate the results and compare them with guides' observations and experience. So that's part of my research that I wanted to share today. I just want to say thanks to our supporters of our program and to the operations that are collaborating with us on this GPS study. It's very exciting to see some of this coming together and hopefully producing some meaningful, usable research for the operations in the future.
That's great, John. Well, thank you so much for walking through that, and thanks for letting us interject there on the slides. I know because I can see the list of attendees that we have at least 100 guides on there, and probably most of them mechanized. So I know that some hands are going to go up in a second. And I think we have our first hand up, Brent, from Santiago Rodriguez.
That is correct.
Hi, John. Great job. This is Chago from Boise, Idaho. How do you separate in your research decisions that ski guides make regarding snow quality? Many times when we're guiding, we're trying to drive an experience as well as safety. And a complementary or the same question asked differently, can you do additional work in which we also have decision tools or ski ROMs where we use the same algorithms but help us select the best snow?
So currently these algorithms that we're running are just focused on the terrain, and they're not going to capture like snow quality. They don't take into account things like wind direction or new snowfall. They're fixed algorithms for just identifying areas that could potentially be a release area. So on that side, you could probably tweak them to look more at those things. And there are other release area algorithms that look at that more, like highlighting for a given wind direction or amount of loading, these particular release areas would be higher avalanche hazard, which may be more relevant to the current conditions that you're talking about. For our research, thanks to our collaboration with guiding operations, they record data as far as ski quality and other kind of, it kind of falls into that realm of the guide's perceived perspective of the different runs that we'll use to kind of help separate what is driving them to use that run. Is it better ski quality or better kind of just terrain as far as the experience for the guests, or is it actually the avalanche hazard that's driving them to take that direction? Does that answer your question? Sorry, I couldn't hear any follow-up.
Yes, it does. Thanks, John.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks, Santiago. Are there any other questions, Brent? I don't see any at this time.
We have no more questions from the floor, Joe.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. Thank you, John, for this great presentation. I suspect there's more questions to come, and they might come to you through other channels.
Yeah, feel free to shoot an email or shoot Pascal an email, and thanks for your help with the technical difficulty.
Oh, happy to help. It was totally minor. Okay, folks, well, we are at 10:24 right now. We want to honor those folks chiming in specifically for presentations on the times that were given. So we are going to flash up the information before you. Please stand up, stretch, do whatever you need to do for 6 minutes, and we'll see you back here on the hour at 11 Pacific, and we're on the hour wherever you are. See you soon. Bye-bye. Hi, everyone. Just a quick interjection. It appears that I said that we would be back on the hour. My mistake. We will be back on the half hour. Thank you to the attentive folks that have pointed that out. It's always good to have 300 folks who can correct you. Okay, we'll see you back in 3 minutes on the half hour. Thanks.